All right. So here we go. This very, very quick, very short notes here. Um, the Adams presidency, 1796 to 1800, the wannabe Washington president. So remember, Adams was vice president at one time. He thought he could beat Washington for president, and then he realized he couldn't, so he didn't. And now Adams gets his own presidency. So let's talk about real quick the election of 1796. We have the Federalists, who are they're looking to continue their dominance of American politics. Federalists have run everything. Washington was pretty much a Federalist. Hamilton was a Federalist. Adams is a Federalist, and they dominate the United States Congress at this time, and they're dominating the presidency. And so the Federalists, when the election of 1796 come along, they want to continue their dominance in American politics, and they ask Adams to run for president. Adams, of course, very quickly agrees, and the Federalists run him for president. And then we have this guy, Tommy J. Those who agreed with Jefferson's view of government, that it should be fairly small, that it should only deal with foreign relations, that everything else should be left to the states, that the federal government should not be involved in the economy and things like that. Those who agreed Jefferson's view of government now called themselves Jeffersonians or Democratic Republicans, and they asked Thomas Jefferson to run for president. Tommy J refuses. He just wants to go back to Monticello. He wants to be left alone. He feels he's done his duty. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. He was Revolutionary Governor of Virginia. Not very good, but he was. He was the ambassador to France. He was the first Secretary of State. Thomas Jefferson feels like, I've done enough. I just want to go home. He says, thanks, but no thanks. And the Democratic Republicans say, dokie dokie. They run him anyways. And Thomas Jefferson's like, what? What just happened here? So even though he didn't want to run for president, the Democratic Republicans nominate him anyways. So here's how the votes came out. He needs 70 votes to be elected president. You can see over here the total number of votes. Adams barely wins. Oh boy. And if you look, right, New England states, this is the base of power for the Federalists, and this will always be the base of power, the New England states. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you view things, this is where most of the people live. Down here, these are mostly Democratic Republicans. They support Jefferson. However, there's just not a lot of people down here. So, Adams barely wins the presidency. However, because of the way the Constitution is set up, Jefferson, who received the second highest number of votes, becomes vice president. And Jefferson is like, what? All I want to do is go home. And now I'm vice president of the United States? By this point, both men who had once been very, very close friends, they were BFFs, like, let's go to Starbucks on Saturday and share a coffee, right? They were extraordinarily best friends. Adams and Jefferson worked on the Constitution, or not on the Constitution, on the Declaration of Independence. A lot of the ideas that are in the Declaration of Independence are Adams. Jefferson just put them into writing. But now, by now, having gone through the Constitution ratification and having gone through then Washington's presidency, the two men are very bitter enemies, personally, politically. They do not like each other at all. Well, this should work out well. So now Adams decides he's got to finish this trifecta of treaties that Washington began with Europe. Washington got treaties with England and with Spain. Adams wants to finish the trifecta. So he wants to be respected like Washington, and he sees getting that last final treaty with a major European power would put him on the same level as Washington. So Adams sends three American diplomats, John Marshall, Thomas Pinckney, and Elbridge Gerry, to France to negotiate a treaty with France. And what transpires is one of the weirdest, one of the wackiest, one of the bizarre, one of the strangest episodes in American history. They get to France, and France is in the middle of this bloody, bloody revolution, which has spiraled out of control into a very violent, very bloody affair. And it's hard to keep track of who's in charge and who's running the country because as soon as someone becomes a leader in France, they get their head cut off. So Marshall, Pinckney, and Gerry are in France trying to figure out who it is that they talk to. And eventually, these French agents, people who work on behalf of the French government, came to meet with the Americans. And they would only identify themselves as Mr. X, Mr. Y, and Mr. Z. That was it. And one day, Mr. X shows up and he says, I know who you need to talk to, but someone will be along to tell you more. And then Mr. Y, and then Mr. Z. Eventually, Mr. X, Mr. Y, and Mr. Z tell the American diplomats that in order to get a treaty, they can get a treaty, they can guarantee a treaty in whatever they want from France, as long as the United States pays a quote unquote tribute to France. The United States pays a tribute to France. Mr. X, Mr. Y, Mr. Z guarantee a treaty with France. So, what is a tribute? A tribute essentially is a bribe. That's what it means. This was an accepted practice in Europe. European countries for a long time had negotiated treaties in such a way that if you want a treaty, you pay the other country a bribe. You give them a tribute, and the other country will give you whatever treaty it is that you want. France just thought they were being European. Well, this is offensive to the United States. The United States, not being a European country, the United States is outraged that we are being asked to bribe the French government in exchange for a treaty. And the US has a slogan called millions for defense, but not 1 cent for tribute, meaning that we are going to begin to build up our military and fight against this insult by the French. And the United States begins what's known as a quasi-war with France. We never formally declare war on France. If we had, it probably would not have gone well. As chaotic and as crazy as France was, we still probably couldn't have beaten them had we declared France. So we build up our military and we have this quasi-war with France, an undeclared war with France, where we attack their ships on the high seas and we try to do a lot of pirating to French goods and French trade. And essentially, we are a pirate nation during this time. But it doesn't go well. France turns the tide against the United States and begins to win this quasi-war and turn the tables on the United States. So instead of us being the pirates and thieving their ships and their crew and their cargo, the French begin to do it to the United States. Oh boy. So that's the first big event in the Adams presidency. It doesn't go well. What you're about to do next destroys the Adams presidency. What you're about to do now is a document analysis known as the Alien Sedition Acts. And it's the brainchild of Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton is convinced, and he convinces John Adams, that the Alien Sedition Acts will keep the poor and the immigrants in their place and the Federalists in power forever. And it destroys Adams' presidency. This, the XYZ affair, this event here, doesn't go well. The Alien Sedition Act go even worse and destroys his presidency. And that's what you're going to do next. And we're done with notes. I told you they were short notes. We're done with notes. And now you'll do the Alien and Sedition Acts. Have a great one, A pushers.